Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? I am so excited to be here and so happy to be greeted by smiling faces. So it's afternoon for you, but it is 7 a.m. for me. And I have been up for a couple of hours with excitement and anticipation. I don't know if any of you have ever presented before, but you always have that awful dream that you missed your presentation that was 2 days ago. So that happened to me this morning, and I'm just so excited to be here. And it's out here in California, it's award season, the Emmys and the Oscars and all that. So I get to say thank you to the Academy for having me this morning. It is a delight to be here. I definitely want to thank Professor Iwobi and Christine, Andrew, and Rachel, who are helping me in the background. So thank you all for being with us this afternoon. I understand that you've had an absolutely amazing session, and I'm glad to help close that out today. Everyone still looks so attentive and alert. That's fantastic. You've been behind a computer screen for several hours. I know what that's like. Last week, I spent 3.5 days from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. behind a computer screen. So I feel for you. All right, let's take a look at this opening slide here and give me some thoughts as to what you see. Just shout them out. What do you see? What stands out to you about this particular picture?
Laughter.
I'm sorry?
Laughter.
Laughter. Okay. What else? Very good.
Engagement.
Engagement. What else?
People in an actual room.
People in an actual room. Good. Absolutely. We haven't seen that in a while, have we? What else do you see? People in an actual room. What else do you notice?
It's a less formal setting than perhaps you would see people. It's not round a board table. It's not gallery style.
Correct. Yes. What else do you see?
Separation.
Separation. What else?
Young people.
Diversity.
I'm sorry? Diversity. Yes, absolutely. Typically, when I show this picture, it is about diversity. And what I want people to notice is the empty seat right here. And typically I ask, who's missing around the table in terms of diversity? Right now, the question is, in terms of the fact that we're in virtual environments, who's the one person that's not in the room? Who's the one person who maybe not be online who should be? And so we're going to be talking about being intentional about a more collaborative approach to today's work environment, connected leadership. So here is our agenda. And for the first hour, we're going to be talking about your 3 main leadership challenges, which are integrating and collaboration. We're going to talk a little bit about VUCA and how that impacts that, increased engagement and how change management needs to be brought into that, and then the sustainability of inclusive team dynamics and how resiliency plays into that. Then a break, you're going to be joining a discussion group. There are going to be 6 different questions that we're going to talk about related to the first hour. And then in the second hour, we're going to go from theory to application. And this is where we're going to look at the 2 assessments that you took. So we're going to understand yourself and better understanding yourself so that you can better lead others. We'll look at the flip side of VUCA, which we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. And then we're going to go over your 30-day action plan, 4 ways in 4 weeks, and a short Q&A. So within the back 2 pages of your book, I want you to write down your 1-word expectation of the session and your 1-word intention for today. So based on what you know of the session, what's your expectation? And then what is your intention as a participant? So I'm interested. Someone tell me, what are your expectations and your intention for today? Catherine, please.
So I'm hoping for something that builds on my knowledge and stretches and grows me a little bit more. And
Definitely.
my intention is to participate and be fully present.
Very good. Thank you, Catherine. Definitely some stretching and growing. And yes, I need participation. So thank you for sharing. Who is that next with their hand up?
As everybody's being shy, I usually pile in. So I'm expecting to be challenged.
Good.
And what I'm seeking to do is embrace that challenge.
Very good. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. Thank you for the bravery and the courage to do that. Thank you. So let's look at this next chart. And I have a question for you. Of the download, which was how to navigate the new normal, how much of yourself or of someone on your team did you see in the ebook? Think about that. When you're reading and we were talking about psychological safety and the different types of situations that people found themselves in. I believe we talked about Nikki and her husband and what she realized about herself and what she realized about her husband. How much of yourself or someone on your team did anyone see in those particular scenarios? And then when you think about that, let's think about these 3 questions. Again, in the back of your book, I want you to write down these questions and the answers to them. So the first question, what is your greatest challenge as a leader right now and why? Your greatest challenge as a leader and why? The next question, what is your team's greatest challenge and why? Your third question, and this might be the challenge, what used to work for you and your team that doesn't seem to be working anymore and why? So for example, was there a strategy that used to work really well? Was there particular techniques or procedures that you used to employ? What used to work for your team and doesn't seem to be working anymore and why? All right, so let's share. Let's talk about some common themes, and probably if it's true for you, it's true for others. So who would like to start with our first question? What's your greatest challenge as a leader and why right now? Emma.
Thank you, Dr. Anita. So mine is leading through change after the impact of the pandemic and feeling positive and energized about this when perhaps I don't. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, it's tough. Thank you for sharing, Emma. Who's next?
Okay. So my biggest challenge as a leader at the minute is the sense of urgency that everything has to be done now. And not giving ourselves enough space to think.
Thank you, Lucy. That's pretty common. Who's next, please?
Okay. It's myself, Sean.
Hi, Sean.
Hi. So being new in the post for a month, I put down gaining authority, but I've caveated it. I've put down respected authority because I've got to try and gauge that point where people understand my position as the leader of the teams, but effectively have that engagement and honesty and respect with the teams as well. It's not an authoritarian position that I want to hold. So it's gauging that sort of middle line is going to be difficult, I sense.
It is. Thank you, Sean, for sharing. Who's up next?
Hi, it's Debbie. Hi, Dr. Anita.
Hello, Debbie.
Hi. I think when mine is team cohesion, I think during the pandemic that the cohesion of the team as a whole is it's just not there. It's become much more disparate. We've kind of moved into different silos as different parts of the team. And I think, that's just been, it used to be that we used to be able to pop into different offices and have those informal conversations. And that's lost, I guess, as a result of the pandemic.
Yes, you're 100% right, Debbie. Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, building on what Lucy and Debbie have said, my biggest challenge is building a shared vision and getting the engagement in building that shared vision. And the reason I'm struggling with that is because, as Debbie said, people have become very disparate, and also, as Lucy said, people all feel too busy doing the day job and rushing around doing what they think is urgent rather than what's important.
Yes. So let me pause right there and give everyone an acronym. Back to the point of what's urgent versus what's important. Here's the acronym. WIN, win. What's important now? What's important now? Let me encourage you. Every month, every week, every day, every hour, you're going to have to ask yourself, what's important now? And that little 3-letter acronym will do wonders in terms of relieving you and helping reduce some stress. I don't know about anybody else, but I usually start the day with 10 things on my to-do list. And throughout the day, I have to determine 1 might be at the top, but number 9 might be what's important now. Sometimes we just need to do that. And it's actually a really freeing thing to be able to say, okay, I have 10 things on my list for right now, but if one thing is what's important now and the other 9 roll over to the rest of the week, I'm going to have to be okay with that. Now, for those of us who are like myself, a recovering perfectionist, that's not the easiest thing to do. But I tell you, once I grabbed a hold of that acronym, what's important now, my stress level went down and I actually got a lot more done. And I got the important things done in the moment. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, let's move to our second question. What is your team's greatest challenge and why? Who wants to share that with me?
2 things for us. Team connectedness. I think we've talked about people being not able to see each other in the same way. And the other one is poverty. I think particularly since the pandemic, and in Wales we're having, in the UK, lots of issues in terms of more and more people getting into poverty. And our client group generally didn't have a lot of money to start with. So I guess because of that increase in poverty, there's a much higher demand on our services. People are stretched further. We haven't got more staff to do the same work. So, the kind of WIN acronym is quite interesting for us because there is only so much we can do. And actually some of it's major structural poverty. We provide houses, so that goes some way to it. But yeah, two big challenges there, definitely.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing. That's huge. And I can only imagine what you and your team must be grappling with in terms of where do we start and possibly a sense of overwhelm. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you to you and your team for everything that you're doing to help those that really need it. Thank you so much. Who else would like to share what your team is struggling with right now and why that is?
So it's a bit of a morph between my challenge and that of my teams. So in policing, we've gone from an organisation, obviously very frontline, public focused, supported by police staff, but everybody being in the workplace, to suddenly during the pandemic, some of the organisation has to be on the operational coalface, as you say. And others have been working very, very much from home. So massive shift for us. And then just struggling with pandemic working, coming into the new agile and hybrid model. So some people have hated being forced to work from home. Others have absolutely loved it. And now to get that new normal, that new way of working and more agile, and for our staff to understand that agility is very different to working in a pandemic.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We're definitely going to talk about agility. When it comes to change, this is something that I was going to mention a little bit later. But here's something that I would like for everyone to write down. And again, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. What usually unsettles people about change is whether they feel like change is being done to them versus whether they feel like change is something that they're pursuing on their own. When people feel like change is being done to them, they're usually going to be resistant to that. When people feel like they're a part of change that's taking place, they're more likely to get on board. And we will talk about that in a little bit more depth. Finally, the last question that I would like some thoughts on: what used to work for you and your team that doesn't seem to be working anymore, and why?
Hi. I think what used to work with the team for camaraderie is the team bonding when you do things outside of work. So we've always had a good sort of social interaction with my team and the wider team. And obviously with COVID, we haven't been able to do that. And I think it's missed. Mm-hmm. I miss it.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The reason that I wrote that ebook was because early on, I was noticing the connection between being physically distant for our health and still being psychologically dependent, which was messing with our mental health. And so it's very, very important that we recognize the connection between those two. And even though I wrote that ebook 2 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm hearing more and more and more in the news about the impacts psychologically to people that we have yet to uncover that will be showing up in the workplace for years to come. So you're absolutely right. So when we talk about the fact that we need to have more connected leadership, what does that look like and what's entailed in that? So let's take a little bit of time to go through the book right now. So when we talk about the heart and soul and brains of teams, we really want to be thinking about the importance of integration and collaboration. And a lot of the things that you mentioned to me are part of VUCA. That's another acronym that actually came out of the military after the Cold War, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when you think about how much the world has changed since the pandemic, yet we're still expected to do more with less. Every year, we're expected to do more with less. So that some of us might feel like, well, you're asking me to do the world with nothing because I've been asked to do more with less over the years. This is kind of where we are. And so, again, I mentioned the fact that people process change differently. Some people see changes being done to them. Some people find a way to be part of the change process. And as leaders, we have to remember that our 100% may be here, but the folks that we're leading, their 100% may be here. We need to recognize that. That's not to say that as leaders we lower our standards, but it's to be aware of the fact that our 100% is here. Someone else's might be here. Someone else's might be here. Someone else's might be here. But that goes back to we must meet people where they are. Wherever people are, that's where we start. And so when we're talking about how people process change, how people are showing up differently now than they were before, the fact that we can no longer get together as a cohesive team, how do we process that? And how do we gauge where people's 100% might be? We might have someone on our team whose 100% might be here, but because of the way that they're handling the changes, their 100% might now be here. That doesn't make them any less valuable, but we need to meet them where they are. Then there's understanding what VUCA looks like, acts like, feels like, and sounds like for everyone. If you think back to the ebook that I had you download, volatility may look like throwing papers in a workplace meeting because we're frustrated. It may sound like raised voices and so on and so forth. If you can have an opportunity to identify how the aspects of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are showing up for the folks that you work with, which admittedly is going to be much more of a challenge now because you don't have that face-to-face close proximity to be able to see if someone's shoulders are up, that means they're stressed versus if they're down. It means we need to be much more aware of what we see online to be able to pick up on those cues that were so much easier to notice when we were together. And so understanding what VUCA looks like, acts like, feels like, and sounds like for folks is going to be key to pursuing that connected leadership despite the distance that we now have. So now let's talk a little bit more about team dynamics in the new normal. Increased engagement is going to require a little bit of knowledge and practice of some change management techniques. And we'll get into some of those a little bit later. But now it's all about the process of managing change and how people show up psychologically, how people are showing up emotionally, how people are showing up physically. Are we getting enough rest? Are we having way too much screen time, and what are we doing to combat that? Are we encouraging people to reach out to one another? There's a practice in particular that you might want to consider if you're not already doing it, and that's when you have an online meeting. If you start the meeting by saying, all right, team, let's have a one breath check-in. And Michael will say, well, I'm a little bit tired, but I'm here. Susan might say, I'm kind of distracted, but I'm here. Jessica might say, I'm having a great day, and if anybody needs some help, I'm here. To go around the room with that one breath check-in to allow people to say how they're showing up and what they need from the team is huge. Because then when we see that someone is distracted, we don't have to make assumptions. They've already told us they're a little bit distracted, and they're doing their level best to come in and connect and do what needs to be done and handle the meeting accordingly. So just by giving that one breath check-in, it also allows people to say, I'm human, this is how I'm showing up, but I'm still showing up, which means I'm still dedicated and committed to this team. The other thing that you might want to consider, again, is whether people change or view change as something being done to them, whether change is something that they can be a part of. How can we try and adjust that perception of change for the people on our team? For instance, those who are now at home who really loved being in the workplace. In the ebook, I mentioned the fact that for some people, that's such a jolt. They just don't know how to manage that. Or maybe too much quality time with the family is really impacting how they can show up for the workplace. Well, we have to have those discussions and see how people are viewing the change. If they're viewing it as something that's being done to them, that's a discussion that we need to have so that we can help coach them into seeing change as something that they can be a part of, not only for themselves, but for the rest of the team and for those that you serve. And then finally, there are 3 concepts that I want to share with you specific to change management, which is the Bridges transition model that says people accept it, they kind of fight about it, and then they'll go back to acceptance. And then there's the Kubler-Ross grief cycle that says people need the opportunity to grieve. And it's not always over death. Sometimes it's grieving the loss of the community that we had when we came into the office together. So sometimes when people seem to be dragging their heels or fighting change, they just need the opportunity to grieve and get over it. And finally, there's the ADKAR model. And the ADKAR model says raising awareness about what's going on, creating some desire for the change, providing knowledge about the change and what's going to take place, giving folks the ability to change, giving them tools, and then reinforcing change. So ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So those are just some high-level concepts related to change management and how you can help your teams recenter and refocus on becoming connected in this new landscape. So now let's talk about the fact that inclusivity creates agility. Sustainability of inclusive team dynamics is going to be huge. I'm not telling you anything you haven't already discovered for yourself. The secret to that is resiliency and helping people understand just how resilient they are based on the fact that they're still showing up, they're still ready to work, they're still committed to their job. And it doesn't mean that you have to show up okay every day. The fact that you're showing up and maybe not as okay as you would like to be is absolutely a sign of resiliency. Being transparent, being vulnerable. Oftentimes we associate vulnerability with weakness, and that could not be further from the truth. Vulnerability requires bravery and courage to say, this is where I am, this is how I'm showing up, this is the support that I need from the team in the moment. Then when we talk about making it safe for people to show up authentically, that goes to psychological safety, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But again, in the ebook, we talked about the psychological safety aspects of the change that we're dealing through. Safety, autonomy that's been taken away from us, fairness, that everyone is all in this together, the trust, where do I find the most credible information, and the esteem. How am I showing up? How is that impacting my family life? How's that impacting my work life? And then the degree to which we all need these things, that's really important when it comes to making people feel safe to show up authentically. And then finally, psychological safety promotes the authenticity that leads to resiliency. So you should notice a loop there. The resiliency, the psychological safety, the ability to change, they're all interdependent and they all work together. So I know that was a lot. There's so much more that I want to share you, but I just want to give you some concepts and some overview to help frame the discussion for where we're going to be going next. So let's look in very general terms at psychological safety on 4 axes. The first is attitude to risk and failure, and that's the degree to which it's permissible to make mistakes. A decision that we make today with the knowledge and information that we have today, 5-10 days down the line, may look different, and we may feel like, wow, that wasn't the best thing to do in hindsight, but in the moment we did what we could with the information that we had. Well, how do we feel about that? What's our attitude towards risk and failure? Number 2 is open conversation. That's the degree to which difficult and sensitive topics can be discussed openly, without fear of retribution, without concerns for shame or blame. Again, going back to that decision we made in the moment, 10 days after, might not seem like the best thing to do, but can we talk about that without people feeling a sense of, wow, I really blew it? No, it's an opportunity to learn. So when we can reframe risk and failure into lessons learned and opportunities to do better, Now we can get somewhere. Number 3, willingness to help, and that's the degree to which people are willing to help each other. Now let's think about this. In our current environment, we talked about always being expected to do more with less, so that 5 years down the line, after every year being asked to do more with less, we're doing everything with nothing, it may feel. But let's think about it. Does that diminish our willingness to help? Absolutely not. But we also need to consider, do we still have the capacity and the ability to help in ways in which the help is requested? So that's something else to think about. It's not always the willingness. Do we have the capacity, and do we have what it takes, the ability to help in the areas that's needed to help? So that's something else to think about. And then finally, diversity and inclusion, the degree to which you can be yourself and are welcome for that. Now, typically, and rightfully so, we think about diversity and inclusion in terms of the way we're all packaged. But let's expand that thought to diversity of background, which determines how we problem solve, the diversity of approach, the diversity of perspective. All of these things come into play in consideration when we're talking about more connected leadership in terms of the book, and we're going to get into that shortly. So what questions and thoughts do you have right now specific to psychological safety and how it does or does not show in your team? Any thoughts, any questions about anything that we've said so far? Is it a lot to take in? Are you with me? Is this resonating? Is this helping you? Thomas?
Hi. This is really helpful, and I was reading the download before and could very much see some of the behaviours in my team that I've taken on. They've had quite different styles of leadership before I came and joined the team about 9 months ago, and I'm quite concerned that they've gone through a lot of change over several years, and that willingness to help and that willingness to have those open conversations aren't necessarily there in the same way as it would be if it was our first journey through significant change. And I wondered if you had any reflections on how to breed that culture around the willingness to help beyond that sort of just the capacity and the ability. How do you bring that in? As I can see how to make sure that we have that attitude to risk and failure that allows people to make mistakes, and inclusivity and diversity and the open conversation. But that willingness to help piece is something I'm struggling with at the moment.
Great question, and I'm glad you asked. So this goes to the ability for us to coach well. And oftentimes leaders confuse coaching and mentoring, and that was actually a good portion of my dissertation, was looking at the differences and making clarifications between coaching and mentoring. So sometimes in our desire to help, we often make suggestions instead of asking questions. So here are 2 things that I would like for you to write down: listening to understand versus listening to solve. Listening to understand versus listening to solve. And how does that get to us helping the folks that we lead with their willingness to help, but not necessarily having the capacity or the ability? So when we're listening to understand, we're truly trying to figure things out. Typically, as leaders, we're charged to solve problems and make things happen, remove barriers and all that. But often I have found when I'm coaching leaders that we automatically jump to listening to solve, where if we first listen to understand, we might come to the conclusion that my only role in solving is to say, oh, the person that you need to see about that is Rachel. But unless we're clear about what the situation is, because we've truly listened to understand, we sometimes insert ourselves or we make suggestions to our folks about ways that they can help. So now going back specifically to your question about how do we help people figure out how they can help? Ask questions. So what's your concern? And they'll tell you. What's your goal? And they'll tell you. How do you think you can get there? And they'll tell you. What do you need in terms of resources? And they'll tell you. So oftentimes, instead of making recommendations right off the bat, asking those open-ended questions, and I will tell you they start with 6 specific words, all words that we've heard before: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Now, this may not be new knowledge, spelled N-E-W, but it might be new knowledge, K-N-E-W, knowledge that you already knew, filed back in your leadership brain, but now I'm bringing it back and refreshing it for you. So the words that start open-ended, empowering questions are who, what, when, where, why, and how. When we can start first listening to understand and asking those questions, it will help the person that we're talking to generate their own solutions. When we can help people own their situation and own their solution, then they can own their success. So it all starts with ownership. And as leaders, it's incumbent upon us to coach through those open-ended questions to help them find ownership to their situations, their solutions, and ultimately their success. I hope that answered your question. Sarah.
Hi, Dr. Anita. I work for a housing association, and we've also got the supported units with hostels for very vulnerable people. And psychological safety is something that we've been applying in those environments for a while, and now we're trying to move it more mainstream. And I lead the finance and IT and development teams, and those very technical teams are very confused as to why does psychological safety matter to them. They see it for their colleagues, they understand it, but they don't see it as applying to them, and they don't see the need for it. It's quite interesting trying to have those conversations of how they're going to benefit. What would you suggest is a good way in?
Love the question. I had specific notes that I wanted to mention about that. Here we are. So here's another acronym. In case you hadn't noticed, Dr. Anita loves acronyms. I absolutely love acronyms. I create them whenever I can. I would love to take credit for this one, but I cannot. But when I got a certification as a psychological safety practitioner, this acronym we learned was absolutely fabulous, and it's safety. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, so now I'm going to go into a little bit of the details for you. So safety, that's the S. Let me give you the letters in order. The S is safety, A is autonomy, F is fairness, E is esteem, T is trust, and the Y is you. So in terms of security, that's all about having certainty and a sense of control. Notice I said a sense of control, not necessarily control. So for some who need a sense of control, when we talk about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, this is going to rock their world if they have a strong need for security. Autonomy, the ability to make independent decisions and or take action. Someone with a strong sense of autonomy, how do you think they reacted to the lockdown in the first 3 months of 2020? They were going stir crazy because they like to have the freedom to come and go and make decisions, and all of a sudden everyone has to stay in the house, right? Fairness, that is in terms of fair exchanges for ourselves and for others. And in terms of the pandemic, it was unfair to everybody. Everyone across the board was suffering. But some people have a very, very strong sense of fairness. Esteem, that's on 3 levels: how we see ourselves, how others see us, and how we think others see us. How we see ourselves, how others see us, and how we think others see us. So for instance, if you happen to be the breadwinner in the home, and now I'm speaking about frontline workers, if you happen to be the breadwinner in the home and you're going out and you're sacrificing your own health in service of others, and yet people don't seem to appreciate that, how is that impacting your esteem? Or on the flip side, if you happen to be the breadwinner in the home and you couldn't work for whatever reason, and now you've lost income, how does that impact your self-esteem? And then trust, identifying and protecting our tribe. Who is it that we align with? Who is it that we can feel our most authentic selves with? And how do we identify that tribe and protect each other? And then you, the degree to which we all need one of these areas of psychological safety and where we need it the most. So when you think of that and you think of your teams, and now you have a really high level understanding of the different aspects of psychological safety, what are you noticing in terms of how folks are showing up and what their highest need might be? Are you seeing that the uncertainty is really messing with the minds of one of your people? Then they may have a really high need for security. If you've noticed that one of your team members is now required to be at home, how is that bothering their sense of autonomy and their ability to come and go as they please? If you're noticing that someone just seems to feel like there's so much unfairness related to all of this, how is that impacting their sense of fairness? Someone who seems to be, for whatever reason, sensing a decrease in their self-esteem, why that might be. Is it because that when we were in the office, people always went to them, and now that we're in our homes, people kind of feel like they've been forgotten about and no longer seen as the go-to person? And then trust. Our tribe is the folks that we're with all the time. And although that can translate well to the virtual environment, if we've already established that, what about folks that we might be onboarding who've not been in the office, who've not been able to see their colleagues face to face, who can't establish that sense of camaraderie with their tribe? How is that showing up in the workplace? So when you think about these aspects of psychological safety and someone asks you, well, what does that mean to me? These are some talking points that you can share with them. And there's so much more to this. There is one book that I highly recommend, and it's called The Fearless Organization. And it talks a lot about organizational dynamics in general, but it also specifically talks about psychological safety. Kevin, hello.
Hello. Hi. Hope this, if you can't answer this one, I understand it's a slight side question, but one of the key aspects of psychological safety you've got is inclusion and diversity. And I think for many organizations, attracting and retaining diverse talent has been a huge challenge. Last couple of years with the George Floyd murder, I think we've had a real renewed effort, but that effort hasn't always translated into change. I'm just wondering whether you've got any tips really on attracting and retaining diverse employees in the workplace and how that psychological safety kind of fits in with that. I'd like to know your thoughts.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for that question. I absolutely do have some thoughts. So my primary focus as a consultant is diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And typically that is known as diversity, equity, inclusion, and as of late, they add belonging. I personally stay away from the equity part because that's typically more HR, but I focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging for the simple fact that you can have diversity, you can have inclusion, and still not have a sense of belonging. So that's where I focus, is on the belonging. And the belonging says, I really can show up and be myself and be accepted for the background that I come from and how that background has shaped my approach to problem solving, and how that approach to problem solving is a uniqueness that I bring to the table that will help break the cycle of groupthink. Oftentimes, the brain is designed to protect us from threats. A threat is anything that's different is deemed as a threat. So if the way you think is different and I feel threatened by that, then we have a problem. Just like if the way you present is different and I feel threatened by that, we have a problem. So the challenge is to make people feel a sense of belonging, not according to what makes us feel that we belong, but according to what makes them feel that they belong. So whenever I work with executives, I always take them through an exercise that says, what does belonging look like, act like, feel like, and sound like? And it's very clear that we make a distinction between those four areas. We've often said in terms of business that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I say in terms of diversity, equity, and belonging, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, that if you can't explain it, you can't attain it. And so unless we can clearly explain and define what belonging looks like, acts like, feels like, and sounds like, it's going to be very much of a challenge to attain that. And again, we have to understand what that means for other people. Now you might say, Dr. Anita, that's a tall order because everybody's going to see things differently. Not necessarily, because when I do these activities, you will see the same words pop up in the four different categories, which says what? We all know what it looks like to feel a warm hug. We all know what that means when it says, hey, I saved a seat for you. We all know what that feels like when someone says, I really want to hear your opinions. Your thoughts are valuable. And so again, unless we can be clear on what that looks like, acts like, sounds like, and feels like, it's going to be hard to get there. Does that help, Kevin? Okay, thank you for asking. What other questions? Wonderful questions. All right. So now I have some questions for you. Of the information that you've received so far, what's coming up for you in terms of how you can be a more connected leader with your folks, especially considering the fact that a lot of people are still working remotely? What's clicking for anybody out there?
Hi.
Hi.
So I look after 2 teams, and we've seen it's been interesting actually, because we've seen real success in the one team in terms of what's clicking, and conversely, that's not worked in the other team, and some of the impact of that has meant higher turnover, higher sickness. And our team, ever since the first day of lockdown, just meet for 15 minutes in the morning on what we call Teams and Toast.
Yes.
And it's a no work zone. So we try and have that social connection, just talk about what was on TV last night. Not obligated to come every morning. There's a real safe space then for conversations about if you're struggling. And literally every day since the beginning of lockdown, they've met and it's just really been really helpful. So that's what's worked for us. So that social stuff that we can't have, we still try to have, and the bond in the team has been amazing.
I love that. Teams and Toast. That is beautiful. And it's such a great idea. One of the things that I wrote about as part of my dissertation was looking at remote intimacy and the fact that generations today that have been raised on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, they seem to feel that because they have developed a relationship virtually, that it's a relationship. Whereas people from our generations understand that a relationship happens like this when you're face to face. And once you've established a solid relationship, then you can translate that to virtual. And so to establish what different generations may feel as a real relationship actually is part of the challenge that we're having right now. We've never been more connected in terms of technology and the fact that I can speak to you from California, right? We're absolutely connected, technically speaking, but are we connected as individuals, as human beings? And that's the challenge that we're having. So to have that discussion with your group absolutely is going to help cultivate that connectedness that you're looking for, that we used to be able to enjoy when we were face to face. So kudos, wonderful best practice. Thank you for sharing. Who else wants to share what's working for you or what you might be picking up today that you're going to implement with your teams? Share. So I always like to say, as leaders, we need to share the credit and take the blame, right? We must do that because ultimately we're responsible. I see a hand up. Allow me to finish this thought. I was coaching a young man who took one of my courses at one of my alma maters where I'm now teaching, and it was leadership and diversity. And in his paper, he wrote about leaders taking ownership for the interactions that they have with their folks. And that is so true. Leaders set the tone for the team. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, just reminding you what impact and influence that you have with your team members. And the more you can just kind of be there and say, hey, whatever you need from me, whatever you need to talk about, there's nothing off limits. I'm here for you. That's huge. When people can just know that they can just come to you and see you as a person and not the role that you happen to fulfill in the organization. I see a hand.
I think what you said about listening to understand versus listening to solve is really interesting, actually. And I found, because sometimes you just want to talk about something and it comes to you, but people offer advice and you think, I'm not really after that, but okay. And I think it's probably important then for me to think about that when my team come to me. Are they wanting me to listen to solve it for them, which is what I tend to assume they want? Or are they actually just running it by me to get it clear in their heads to make sure they're on the right route? So I think that's something very, very much I can think about with my team and take forward, actually.
I love it. I love it. And here's a never fail trick to help you decipher between the two. Is everybody ready for this never fail trick? When people come to you, ask them what they want. Do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to help you? It works every time. And I'm not trying to be flippant. I'm really not. In workshops, I've had people tell me, I really want to appreciate this person. I want to give them something that's really meaningful. What do you think I should do? And I will say, how about ask them what they like? People will tell you if you just ask them. So absolutely, ask people when they come to you. So tell me what you need. Do you just want me to hear your thoughts, or do you want me to help you, as a thought partner? And they'll let you know. I see another hand.
Hi. What you said there about asking people what they want, I've been doing that a while, and what I found that's happened is they know I'm going to ask that. So when they start talking to me now, they say, this is what I need, or this is what I need. So they tell me whether they actually want me to do something about it, or whether or not they just want to sound off.
Haley, doesn't that make your life easier?
Much easier. It doesn't always work, but yeah.
A little bit anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Haley. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts before we go to break? All right. We're going to give you an opportunity to take a break. Really quick, talk less about, I think for me, it's about less talk about less work and more about how we work. Well, let's talk about that. Talking less about work and talking more about how we work. And that's a beautiful segue to something I was just going to mention. So in my talk for today, I was not going to bring up strengths, but this is a perfect time to do that. How many people are familiar with Gallup and the Strengths Finder? Let me see. Okay, a few people. All right. The Strengths Finder is an absolutely amazing, amazing tool for helping teams start to work in a more connected, collaborative, cohesive way. Strengths Finders is about strengths in 4 different domains: executing, strategic thinking, relationship building, and influencing. Executing, strategic thinking, relationship building, and influencing. Those are the 4 domains of strengths. And within those domains, there are different types of strength that show up. So when we think in terms of talking less about work and more about how we work, if you were to have a project, you would want to make sure, and I'm talking in general terms here, you'd want to make sure that you have someone strong in execution, obviously, to make the project happen. You'd want someone strong in strategic thinking to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. You would want someone with relationship building who would know how to cross-functionally collaborate, and you would want someone strong in influencing to be able to socialize the idea well. So when we think about talking about work versus talking about how we work, that's one approach that I share with a lot of my leaders. And I've actually designed a tool that's called talent to task alignment, where we have them set out what the project is, who the stakeholders are, when the due date is, the resources that they need. And then we look across the 4 domains and decide, of these things that we need to be done, who has the strengths in these areas to make the project run a little bit more seamlessly. And it works very, very well. So that's just one thought in terms of strengths. So before we go on break, I want everyone to do me a favor. Stand up with me. We're going to demonstrate something about strengths really quickly. All right, I'm going to adjust my video so you can still see me. These are all my notes and workbooks that I reference a lot. So we're talking about strengths. And what I'd like you to do is stand with your feet just normal. And I want you to give me 5 toe raises. Ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I used to be a fitness instructor for about 20 years. So if you all won't cooperate, we're going to do push-ups in a minute. I'm teasing you. All right. So now put your toes together like this and give me 5 more toe raises. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now put your heels together like this and give me 5 more toe raises. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now keep standing, and I want different ones to tell me, what are you feeling right now? What are you physically feeling? Someone tell me.
More alive.
More alive. What else?
Silly.
Silly. Don't feel silly. This was a good exercise. You've stretched yourself. What else are you feeling?
I'm hoping you're going to say that that's the equivalent to 350 calories.
Friday it will be. Today it's still, like 2. But do it on a Friday and you get more out of it. What else are you feeling specifically in terms of your legs? Anyone? In terms of your legs. What's that?
Rounded.
Slightly sore calves.
Slightly sore calves. That's what I want you to feel. Is anybody feeling a little bit of a burn? A little bit of a burn now in your calf muscles. So let's look at this in terms of strengths. We walk around on our legs using our calf muscles every day. But do you usually feel that? No, because it's a muscle that you exercise every day just by walking around. Strengths are the same thing. What makes you all amazing in what you can do that no one else can do comes easy to you because it's a strength. But if you take that strength and use it in different ways as a leader, just like we use those same calf muscles, but because we put our feet this way and this way, we use different aspects of those calf muscles that we don't normally feel. Leadership strengths are the same way. Is everyone following me on that? So, what are some of your leadership strengths that you can deploy in different ways and exercise in different aspects of your leadership to leverage what you already do well and perhaps minimize some gaps that you might need to close in terms of things that you'd like to do better? Is that making sense for everyone? Good. I love that exercise because number one, it gets you out of your chair, gets you to stretch, but also because you can feel those calf muscles that you use every day and don't normally feel, it demonstrates how you can use strengths that you just do every day and don't think about it because it comes naturally to you, how you can use those strengths differently and create some different outcomes for you and your teams. Yes, thank you so much for the free strengths test. Love, love, love that. Take that. You will absolutely be amazed. Some of it you'll be like, yeah, I knew that. And some of it you'll think, well, that's not a strength. But here's the point. If you don't recognize it, it's a strength. So we can talk about that in another session. All right. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go to a break. So to set you up for success, you're going to stretch your legs. You might want to do some more toe raises if you'd like to do that. And you might burn off 350 calories if you do enough. Refresh your beverage, all right? And then when we come back, you're going to share your time in a group with 7 or 8 people. And you're going to have 20 minutes to discuss one question that kind of ties us back to where we've been this morning. And in the group, again, we're talking about setting yourself up for success. Listen to each other to understand and not to respond with solutions. And that might be a challenge because we're leaders. So we're going to want to say, well, have you tried this? Just listen to understand. Before I let you go, these are the 6 questions that you're going to be considering during break. And you're each going to be in a different session. So how has the virtual environment impacted your team? What might your team be grieving over? Remember, we talked about that as part of change management. What is your vision as a leader of teams in the new normal? What new and different team dynamics seem to be working? What is better or more effective about your team now and why? And then finally, what is a lingering area of concern for your team and why? So take 10 minutes for yourself, and then we'll come back and we'll get you into your breakout groups. Has this been good so far? Are you getting some stuff out of this? Good. I'm glad. I'll see you in about 30 minutes.